So you want to hear more of the tale I call the Sorrow of Rook-Wing? Do you remember where we finished last time? The brave party exiting the horrifying dungeon, scarred, battered and bruised after a long crawl through the torturous depths, covered in the blood of gnolls, wights, merrows and bugbears. But through it all, they press onwards with the thought of riches in their minds and hearts, ready to accept their well-deserved reward for saving Thurk and Thera, the children of Therin, the Jarl of Rook-Wing. So once again, Matthew was playing as his Dragonborn warrior called Korin, Ted was playing his human ranger called Frost, Tom was his Tiefling Warlock Temerity, and Cameron was playing as his human Cleric called Pavel. Matthew also had his new weapon, the Horror's Maw, which is a long sword which burns with the fire when wielded with two hands, so Matthew had to weigh up through the adventure whether to use a shield for more protection or wield the flames of the Horror's Maw. So the party started on the day-long journey back to Rook-Wing in order to collect their reward. They travelled all day and camped overnight. During this night, while Ted was on watch, he managed to detect a small scouting party of skeletons approaching their camp. The party rallied and bested the skeletons before they could deal any real damage. However, Cameron used his wisdom to understand the fact that there shouldn't be skeletons this far out in the wild for no reason, so it must have been the work of some sort of necromancer or evil magic. The next day, our brave party arrived back at Rook-Wing. Upon approaching the Jarl's longhouse, they noticed a large encampment outside the village, large enough to house an army. Soldiers wearing the seal of Uthros wandered the town as well as the Rook-Wing guards. When they entered the Jarl's longhouse, they realized that the Lord Protector of Uthros, one of the four kingdoms, had travelled from the capital city of the kingdom, Stoneshore, to this small secluded village. After retrieving their reward from the Jarl, which consisted of a bit of gold and a few gems, the Lord Protector asked for their aid. He had been sent by the King of the Four Kingdoms with the army of Uthros to battle the Chaos army that had risen through a flame of chaos. The flame had opened deep in a dungeon below a frozen mountain to the north. The party rested and rejuvenated before setting off on their new quest. They also gathered information before they left. They learned that there was a hidden passage to the side of the mountain which would lead them through a frozen ruin before entering the dungeon from the rear via a hidden doorway. They also learned that the army of chaos used skeletons as their grunts and scouts. The party decided not to question why the other three kingdoms, Usma, Escros and Escana, were not aiding the war efforts, as one would think that the entire continent of Ascaria would war with the Chaos Scourge, if not the entire world of Mercia. The party travelled for a few days without incident before finding the entrance to the frozen passage. They entered it, their skins shivering as the cold wind whistled through their clothes and armour. Their weapons almost seemed to freeze in their hands, it was so cold. They first entered a large room with a passageway to their right and a staircase leading up to a ledge that then led to another passageway to the left. On top of the ledge were a few skeleton archers and skeleton pikemen. A bloody battle ensued, with Matthew charging into the fray, his burning sword in hand, while Ted had launched as many arrows as he could into the fray. Cameron launched a radiant holy fire from his hands to burn the undead fiends, while Tom used his famous eldritch blast to damage the skeletons as best he could. Ted eventually got stuck in with his sword, and eventually the skeletons were beaten, but not without the party sustaining injury. Cameron used his so precious healing magic to help the party as best he could, though the dungeon would only get more difficult to crawl through. Knowing that time was of the essence, the party had to make a quick decision about which passage they would go down. They decided to go the passageway on the right, at the bottom of the staircase. They followed a thin hallway, the walls once again made of solid ice with large icicles reaching down from the ceiling, trying to grab them at any chance they could. They eventually came to a door in their right, which was open, and it seemed to lead into the same room as a door straight in front of them. The hallway carried on to the left of the doorway in front of them. The party decided to do a breach and clear tactic, of Matthew and Cameron blasting down the door in front of them, while Ted and Tom would enter to the door on their right. To Ted and Tom's horror, they were met by a band of 4 skeleton swordsmen and 6 skeleton pikemen, all facing them. However, Matthew stumbled as he bashed down the door and fell on the floor while also alerting the skeletons to their presence. The skeletons turned, fighting on both fronts. An extremely bloody battle ensued, with all of the adventurers sustaining heavy injuries. They eventually pushed back into the hallway where a deadly close-quarter combat ensued, with Matthew on the front holding them back, while Ted fired arrows from behind trying to miss Matthew, while Tom and Cameron attempted to weave spells around them. Eventually the skeletons were beaten, but the adventurers had to rest for a few minutes to gather their breath and bandage their wounds. Moving further into the frozen cavern, the party next came across a doorway on the right. The door was locked by 2 large padlocks, and next to these padlocks were 2 statues, each wielding a sword, which turned out to be keys to the padlocks. Upon asking the statues questions, the party noticed that only sometimes did one statue answer, and only sometimes did the other statue answer. They eventually learned their names, Aragak and Lorans. It took the party a long while to figure out this riddle, but they eventually figured out that Aragak answered any questions that started with a letter between A and K, the first and last letter of his name, and the same with Lorans. They unlocked the door, and they were gifted with a weapon for Ted, the Winter's Bite, a bow which dealt frost damage as well as physical. The heroes followed the hallway further, finding numerous passageways blocked by cave-ins of ice. Eventually they found a long staircase heading downwards towards a large black door, engraved with ornate carvings of a heroic battle between the 4 elements and the 4 planes that divide them. However, a water elemental blocked their path. The battle ensued, with the water elemental bouncing from water to a physical form, pounding waves of crushing water into them while slamming them with its fists of pure water. Eventually the water elemental was bested, thanks to Matthew's sword blazing with fire and hatred. The party then continued down the staircase. So you want to know what happens next? What happens to our band of brave heroes as they venture through the large ornate door as black as night? Then join me again soon, adventurer, and I shall continue the tale of the Sorrow of Rook-Wing.